Now, before we get to number 1 on my countdown, I want to give you what I promised you in the beginning of the video. Now, I know only being able to pick 10 WrestleManias, I had to leave out a lot. And I have about 7 WrestleManias on my list that I really wanted to include in the countdown. But it's not a top 17, it's a top 10. So I definitely wanted to do an honorable mentions segment in this video. And I'm going to give you some of my WrestleManias that I really enjoyed and I wanted to include on the top 10, but in the end, I chose to bump off. Number 1 is WrestleMania 4. I was a big fan of WrestleMania 4. Again, I like this pay-per-view for personal reasons. I remember watching it on pay-per-view. I have a lot of memories of this day and watching Savage win the title. And you guys know, aside from Bret Hart, Savage was pretty much my number 2. I loved Bret and I loved Savage back in the WWF days. And Savage getting his moment at WrestleMania 4, for me, was a great personal memory. So WrestleMania 4 is definitely an honorable mention. And WrestleMania 4 also was on my previous top 10 several years ago. I also want to include WrestleMania 14, Austin and Tyson and Michaels, the launching of Stone Cold Steve Austin. That was a great pay-per-view. A lot of you put WrestleMania 14 on your top 10 as well, so I'm sorry that I didn't include it, but I do appreciate WrestleMania 14 and I know how good it is. WrestleMania 20 is another pay-per-view. Who can forget that one? So much great shit took place on that pay-per-view as well, especially the ending. Probably one of the best, most classic endings to a WrestleMania of all time. And of course, we all know that that moment can never really be relived again and be appreciated because of what Chris Benoit would wind up doing. But watching Chris and Eddie close out the show on the 20th anniversary of WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden with the confetti coming down and embracing both as world champions, man, that was a moment. That really was a moment. I can't believe WrestleMania 20 is not on my list, but I had to bump it. I also have to mention WrestleMania 22 from Chicago. A lot of fans love this pay-per-view. That was the night that Rey Mysterio won the World Heavyweight title after Eddie Guerrero's death. We had the great match between Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon, and we had John Cena retaining in the main event against Triple H. We had the great hardcore match between Edge and Mick Foley as well. This pay-per-view was pretty loaded, but in the end, it didn't make my top 10. The one the very next year, WrestleMania 23, is an underrated WrestleMania. It's always mentioned by you guys as one of your favorites as well, so it's hard to not show WrestleMania 23 love. And WrestleMania 25. WrestleMania 25 is the home of arguably the greatest WrestleMania match in history. I mean, it's Savage and Steamboat, and it's Taker and Shawn. Take your pick. WrestleMania 25 I really wanted to include on this list, but there was a couple of things about WrestleMania 25 that I didn't like as much as some of these other WrestleManias, but still a damn good show. And if I was going to do a top 20 WrestleManias, 25 would definitely be on there. So would WrestleMania 31. You know, who can forget that main event? Seth Rollins cashing in the Money in the Bank on Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. That was fucking great. WrestleMania 33, I really enjoyed. WrestleMania 34, I really enjoyed. Hopefully, WrestleMania 35 will either be an honorable mention or it'll crack the top 10 next time I do one of these. Let's keep our fingers crossed there. Let's hope that it doesn't land on my worst WrestleManias of all time. And just for good measure, just for shits and gigs, let's talk about some of the worst WrestleManias. I got to start with WrestleMania 2. I think WWE bit off a little bit more than they could chew back then, trying to do 3 separate buildings in 3 separate cities all at once. I think that would be tough to do now, you know, in 2019, much less 1986. So that probably wasn't the best idea in hindsight, and the pay-per-view itself wasn't that great. You know, we had a tag team title switch. Andre won a battle royal. Pretty memorable main event with Hogan and Bundy. But aside from that, you know, the Mr. T and Piper boxing match, it just wasn't one of my favorites. WrestleMania 9, of course, pissed me off with Hogan coming out and stealing the world title from Yokozuna. I'm probably biased there because of the whole Bret Hart thing, but WrestleMania 9, I was not a big fan. WrestleMania 11 was a big pile of shit. Oh my God. You know, Shawn and Diesel had a really good match. Lawrence Taylor gave a really solid effort and had a really good showing for himself for a guy that's never wrestled before. He put on a really good match. But despite those highs, there was a shit ton of lows on WrestleMania 11, and I absolutely hated that WrestleMania. WrestleMania 15. You know, I can't believe I'm saying that. I was in the building for WrestleMania 15 in Philly. But that whole card, aside from Rock and Austin, all of those matches were just thrown together. I just felt like there weren't any solid storylines going on. Everything was all over the place. The Intercontinental title match was like a 4-way. The Hardcore title was a 3-way. You had a tag team title match with Owen and Jarrett defending against two opponents that were determined on Sunday Night Heat. You know, Mankind and Big Show were wrestling for the right to referee the main event, and Vince was out there. It was just real kind of convoluted, and even though I was there and I made the trip up to Philly that year, I did not enjoy WrestleMania 15. I also didn't enjoy WrestleMania 16. Fuck that WrestleMania. Why the hell they just didn't go with Triple H versus The Rock in the main event for the title and have The Rock go over, I'll never know. That Four Corners match with four McMahons was horrible, hated it, hate to even talk about it. Don't even get me started about the last time WWE was in MetLife Stadium, WrestleMania 29, another pile of shit pay-per-view. Triple H beating Brock Lesnar made me puke. And of course, the main event, you know, I have WrestleMania 28 in my top 10. I thought John Cena versus The Rock was that good. The next year, it was the complete opposite. Totally dropped the ball and missing an opportunity, turning John Cena heel. Gave us one of the crappiest and most predictable WrestleMania main events ever. And everybody hated it, and the crowd booed that match out of the building. And the last entry on my worst WrestleManias list would have to be WrestleMania 32. From Dallas, huge record-breaking crowd, but much like WrestleMania 29, another crappy, predictable finish. Roman Reigns defeating Triple H for the title. I was a Roman Reigns defender. I still am, but I did not like the finish of that because I thought it was way too predictable. Brock Lesnar and Dean Ambrose had a huge letdown of a match as well. WrestleMania 32 just wasn't good. WWE did have some injuries. I think some guys were hurt. WrestleMania 32 just wasn't very pleasant. And I was excited for it. I'm always amped up for WrestleManias, but they really let us down with WrestleMania 32. And 33 and 34 were pretty good. Hopefully 35 will be as well. Which brings me to number one. No surprise to any of you, I'm sure, that number one on my top 10 WrestleManias is WrestleMania 3. This show has a very special meaning to me because I was there. WrestleMania 3 took place in the town that I was born in. I was actually born in Pontiac, Michigan, at Pontiac General Hospital. And back then, this is where the Silverdome was located that the Detroit Lions played in. And I think they even shared that building with the Pistons for a while until they built the Palace. And I had been in the Silverdome a couple of times for football games. And when WrestleMania came to town, it was a no-brainer. I was going to have to go there. Now, I remember probably more about the build, and I remember more about watching the lead-in to WrestleMania between Hogan and Andre than I remember actually going to the show itself. I remember we just kind of treated it like you would a football game. You know, it's not like now where you're taking pictures in front of the arena and all over the place and putting them on Facebook. I just went to the show without really thinking about taking pictures. I was just a kid. You know, I was a little 11-year-old kid, a little snot. And back then, it's not like we had cell phones in our pockets, so I don't really have the documentation of this show that I wish I had because it was so historic. Still to this day, I believe that this was the biggest WrestleMania of all time. I know a couple of years ago at 32, technically they may have beaten this attendance record, and even the 93,000 the WWE claims were at WrestleMania 3 has been rumored to be exaggerated over the years. Now, I was there, and it sure as shit felt like 93,000 to me. There were not a ton of empty seats. Maybe up top, where I was, there was a few empty seats, but the building was packed. So whether or not WWE exaggerated this number, they probably did. It's probably more around 80,000, but when you get to that many people, you know, 80,000, 90,000, what's the difference? It was a shit ton of people, and it looked awesome. It was a great visual that night, and I loved that dome because half of the show was in the daylight, and the other half was in the dark. This WrestleMania was built around the mega main event of champion Hulk Hogan defending the WWE title against Andre the Giant. Andre had been billed as undefeated for 15 years. He was Hogan's friend. All throughout Hogan's babyface run in WWE, the two would have some wars back when Hogan was a heel working for Vince Sr., and Andre would win all of those encounters. But now Hogan has returned to the company in 1984, won the WWE title, defeating the Iron Sheik. He had been on a 3-year championship run here, and he was unstoppable, mowing down everybody. And here it is, WrestleMania time. WWE wants to put an epic main event together. So they tell the story where Vince flies overseas to go meet with Andre, who at the time was filming The Princess Bride, and says, hey, do you want to come back in, main event WrestleMania, and put over my champion? I'll pay you an assload of money. Let's turn you heel, align you with Bobby Heenan, and you can challenge Hulk Hogan and put him over and do the honors. And main event WrestleMania, Andre agreed, and that's when they started doing the segments on Piper's Pit, where Andre was being honored for his various achievements and his lifetime achievements and all of that, and Hogan would come out and crash the party, and you could see Andre getting annoyed. I noticed it. Even as a kid, I could see it in Andre's face that something was up, and I'm like, oh man. And then finally, they have like the third or fourth one of these Piper's Pits, and Jesse Ventura and Piper had gotten into it at some point, and Jesse told Piper, hey, if you can produce Hogan here next week, I will produce Andre, and I will show you that there's some tension there. Piper agrees. You have Hogan on the show next week, and Andre shows up with Bobby Heenan. And that's when Hogan looks at him like, what are you doing here with Bobby Heenan? And the epic moment where Andre rips the shirt off of Hulk Hogan's chest, along with the gold chain that he wore. Hogan's chest was bleeding because I believe Andre's giant thumbnail caught him in the chest and cut him, and he had blood coming down his chest. I mean, it was amazing. And so now Hulk Hogan, this unstoppable champion, who seems like a real-life superhero. He did feel like He-Man or something to a kid. And he's now in for the fight of his life. And I remember a lot of people thought that Andre the Giant was going to win this match. I know I sure as hell had my doubts. I mean, WWE made you believe that Andre the Giant had not lost a match in 15 years, even though he had lost a few. A couple by DQ here and there. Andre definitely had some losses. But WWE made you forget about that. There was no Wikipedia. There was no internet. You couldn't go fact check this shit. If you were a kid and they told you Andre the Giant was undefeated for 15 years, you believed it. So the scale of this main event is something that they've never been able to recreate. I mean, years later, to pack out a 100,000-seat arena, in modern times, when you can buy wrestling tickets on the internet, you've got StubHub and Ticketmaster and all these different places you can grab tickets. Back in the day, you had to call. You had to drive to the box office. It was hard to get tickets for some shit like this. So to be able to pack out a building that big in 1987, only the Beatles were capable of doing that. So this was a huge deal. And the main event, I remember it so well. It was dark as shit in that building, but you could see the big screens over the ring really well. And when Hogan picked up Andre the Giant and body slammed him, the match itself wasn't very good. If you go judge this match, what are you going to give it? A 2 out of 10? A 1.5 out of 10? But it didn't matter that the match wasn't good. It was about the confrontation. It was about the drama. That's what pro wrestling is all about. And the great finish in the end with Hulk Hogan finally knocking Andre the Giant off of his feet. Andre had not been knocked down the entire match. He even came very close to pinning Hulk Hogan in the opening seconds when Joey Marella nearly counted 3 on Hogan. Andre doesn't even get taken off his feet throughout the whole match. Hogan finally catches him with a clothesline. Andre goes down. Hogan sees the opportunity, gets up, and lifts up Andre and body slams him. And look at that visual. Just to see that massive human being lifted over Hulk Hogan's head and slammed to the mat. It's just, you didn't see it. Now, Andre, in his lighter days, had been body slammed a couple of times. Hogan famously body slammed Andre the Giant once or twice. I believe even Stan Hansen and a couple of other guys have been able to body slam Andre the Giant. But that wasn't when he was over 500 pounds and could barely move. When he was younger, he could help these guys get him up in the air. Hogan was pretty much lifting up dead weight. It was an amazing feat of strength by Hogan, and Andre went down hard. Hogan hit him with the leg drop. Referee counted 3, and Hulk Hogan retained the title. And I'll never forget Andre riding off in the cart, being pelted by all the trash, because my hometown of Detroit is full of a bunch of low-life, degenerate assholes, and they were completely littering the ring with crap and shit and throwing stuff at Andre. I'm so glad that Andre didn't get hit in the head with a beer bottle or a battery or something like that. The fans were just brutal that night, but it was an extremely memorable main event and probably one of those most memorable finishes to any wrestling match in WWE history. And also on this pay-per-view or on this card is arguably the greatest wrestling match that has ever taken place. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite. As a matter of fact, I know it's not because I give the nod to Brett and Owen for selfish reasons. But for many, many years, people considered Ricky Steamboat and Randy Macho Man Savage as the greatest wrestling match ever. And it was a great build, just like Hogan and Andre. You know, Ricky Steamboat got injured by Randy Savage on TV when Savage crushed Steamboat's throat with the bell, and Steamboat had to be carted off to get medical attention. He couldn't talk. His throat was crushed. He was out of action for a while. He sold it beautifully. Finally came back to challenge Randy Savage at WrestleMania for the IC title. Savage had been champion for over a year by this point. George Steele was in Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's corner. Animal Steele had been feuding with Savage prior to this. He was Savage's opponent at WrestleMania 2. And their issue never really got resolved because George Steele was so obsessed with Miss Elizabeth. But, you know, the match was beautiful. You go back and you watch it today, and again, just like a lot of matches I've talked about on this countdown, it holds up as a great wrestling match. And one personal memory I do have of this is that it was difficult to understand what was happening from where I was sitting. There was one really close near fall during the match. I think it was near the end of the match where the entire audience thought that Ricky Steamboat won. And I remember being way up there thinking that Steamboat had won the title, but it was only a 2 count. The fans were cheering. I remember everybody around cheering, and then the match still going on in the ring. So it was just really hard to see and hear way up in the cheap seats where I was. But finally, when Steamboat did roll up Randy Savage one more time and get the win, you knew it was real then. And one of the biggest pops of the night, I'd say Savage and Steamboat and Andre and Hulk gave you the 2 loudest fan reactions of that entire night, at least in the arena. It also marked the very first retirement of Roddy Piper. He took on Adrian Adonis, and Piper was a babyface at this point, had recently turned face, and it was a hair versus hair match. The loser was going to get their head shaved. And a couple of weeks before this on TV, there was a television match where Brutus Beefcake got his hair cut or something like that by Adrian Adonis, and Beefcake was having tension with his own members of the Dream Team. And this would mark the babyface turn of Brutus Beefcake as well. After Piper defeated Adrian Adonis with a sleeper hold, Brutus hit the ring and helped Roddy Piper shave the head of Adrian Adonis. And it's really sad that Adonis would die right after this. He would be involved in that car accident that would take his life, and it was really sad because I was a big Adrian Adonis fan. And to see him work one of his last matches with Roddy Piper is kind of sad when you go back and look at it. But Piper, as we know, would come back to wrestle a lot of times after this. It's amazing to me that this guy retired in 1987, but would have a match in 2009 at WrestleMania 25. How crazy is that? I also really like the 6-man tag on the show as well. The Hart Foundation and Danny Davis taking on the Bulldogs and Tito Santana. This one felt real too. I just really could feel the heat in this feud because Danny Davis was the evil referee. Danny Davis was the referee in the Santana Macho Man match from the previous year when Santana lost the Intercontinental title. And then Danny Davis also helped the Harts beat the Bulldogs. And that was the match where Dynamite Kid got injured on the outside of the ring and Davey Boy had to go it alone, and the Harts were able to beat him, win the tag team titles. Now the Bulldogs have teamed up with Tito Santana to take on the Hart Foundation and their new friend, Dangerous Danny Davis. And I remember all the fans were just chomping at the bit to watch Danny Davis get the hell beaten out of him. And he did. When he finally got in there, I cannot tell you how happy that crowd was. They wanted him dead. Everybody wanted Danny Davis to literally die in that match. And he took some amazing punishment. He was taking pile drivers and clotheslines and press slams. He was just being beaten from one end of that ring to the other. And in one of the most brilliant finishes, I absolutely love this. When everybody's kind of brawling and being distracted on the outside of the ring, Danny Davis finds himself with Jimmy Hart's megaphone and wallops, I think it was Davey Boy, right in the face with it, and gets the 3 count. Danny Davis actually scored the pinfall in this, and that was awesome. I was a big Bulldogs fan. I was hoping they were going to win back the tag team titles at some point from the Hart Foundation, but since this was a 6-man match, there was no title on the line. Yeah, I'm actually surprised at that, looking back, that they didn't put the tag team title on the line and just do a straight tag match with the Harts and the Bulldogs. But the 6-man match definitely made for some entertaining moments, especially with Danny Davis getting his ass kicked all over the building. The six-man match with King Kong Bundy and Hillbilly Jim was also fun. They had the little guys with them. Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook were teaming up with Bundy to take on Hillbilly and Little Beaver and the Haiti Kid, and that was extremely memorable because at the end we all know that Bundy got his hands on Little Beaver and damn near killed the poor fella. I remember the Billy Jack Haynes and Hercules match as well. I remember the build to that on TV. That was very interesting to a fan of my age. And Hercules ended up bloodying Billy Jack Haynes' face with the chain wrapped around his fist near the end of that match after it ended, I believe, in a double countout. That was memorable. Harley Race defeating the Junkyard Dog. I remember that feud as well, and Junkyard Dog had to bow at the end. I think he did a little curtsy and then walloped Harley Race with a steel chair. We had a lot of good random singles matches on the show as well, like Butch Reed beating Coco Beware. We had the Honky Tonk Man taking on Jake Roberts. Honky would win that match. Alice Cooper famously was in Jake Roberts' corner for that, and that's when they pulled out the Python and damn near made Jimmy Hart shit his pants. Tag team matches out the ass on this show as well. We had the Can-Ams defeating Bob Orton and Magnificent Morocco. We had the Dream Team taking on the Rougeau brothers. They beat them, and that was the official split from Brutus Beefcake when Dino and Greg would leave Brutus all by himself, so Brutus would be a babyface after that. We had the Iron Sheik and Volkov defeating the Killer Bees when Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who had recently come into the company, he hit the ring and wound up hitting Sheik and Volkov with the 2x4, getting the Bees disqualified. And pretty interesting right after this would be the famous incident with Iron Sheik and Hacksaw being pulled over by the police, and there was cocaine in the car. Sheik would be let go. Hacksaw would be let go after that. Pretty dark moment in WWE's history there. But overall, when you look at WrestleMania 3, it's hard to compare it to a show like WrestleMania 17 because they were so different. And if you guys would put WrestleMania 3 a little bit lower on your countdown, you know what? I got no issue with that.